The morning of my own engagement party, I stood in the hallway outside the banquet room at the Whitmore and listened to my fiancé tell another woman he loved her. I didn't gasp. I didn't push open the door. I just stood there with a glass of champagne in my hand, the condensation running cold down my fingers, and I listened. "After tonight, it'll be different," Nathan said. "I promise you. Once the deal with her father closes, we renegotiate everything." Her name was Simone. She was the junior associate at his firm, 26 years old. With the kind of effortless confidence that comes from never having had to fight for a seat at the table. I had met her twice at office events. Both times she'd smiled at me, the way you smile at someone you've already decided doesn't matter. I set the champagne glass down on a side table, very carefully, and I walked back to the ballroom. My father was standing near the window, talking to two of his partners. He caught my eye from across the room. Just for a second. And in that second, something passed between us that I couldn't quite name. "Not yet." I smiled at him. He nodded once, slowly. Then I spent the next 2 hours being the perfect almost bride. I need to explain something about Nathan Hale before I explain anything else, because people always ask the same question and I want to answer it honestly. Yes, I knew he came from money. Yes, I knew he was ambitious. Yes, I knew that his mother, Beverly— No, wait, I promised myself I'd use real names. His mother, Diane, thought I was barely worth her dining room chair. But I loved him. Or I thought I did. I think what I actually loved was the version of him I'd spent 3 years constructing in my head, filling in every gap with the best possible explanation, rounding every rough edge until the whole thing looked smooth. I was 31 years old. I had an MBA from Georgetown. I had been running the day-to-day operations of my father's investment group since I was 27, though almost no one in Nathan's world knew that. Because my father had always believed that the best position is the one no one knows you hold. My name on the org chart was Director of Strategic Initiatives, which sounded important but vague. My actual job was deciding where $2.3 billion in assets went and why. Nathan knew I worked for my father's company. He thought it was a small regional wealth management firm. He had no reason to think otherwise, because I had never corrected him, and neither had my father. That was not an accident. My father's name is Walter Ashby. If you move in certain circles, private equity, commercial real estates, anything involving the Eastern Seaboard's financial infrastructure, you know the name. If you don't move in those circles, you might not. Walter has spent 40 years being extremely powerful and completely uninterested in being famous. He is the kind of man who owns the building but never puts his name on it. When Nathan Hale started dating me, his firm ran a background check. Standard practice. It came back clean. My name, my address, my modest salary listed on my tax returns, my Georgetown degree. Everything true. Everything incomplete. My father had suggested this arrangement when I first brought Nathan home. He didn't say he didn't trust Nathan. He said, "Let's see who he is when he thinks the ceiling is low." 3 years later, standing in that hallway, I had my answer. I didn't confront Nathan that night. I went home with him. I made coffee. I sat on our couch and watched him talk about the party. Who'd been there, what deals might come from it, how well it had gone, and I nodded in the right places. He kissed me goodnight and went to sleep. I lay in the dark for a long time. Then I called my father. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he'd been waiting. "I heard them," I said. There was a pause. Not surprise, calculation. "Come to the house tomorrow morning," he said. "We'll have breakfast." I want to be clear. What happened next was not my father's idea. People have a way of assuming that a daughter who acts decisively must have had a man behind her telling her what to do. What actually happened at that breakfast table was that my father laid out 3 options: confront and dissolve quietly, or wait. And I chose the 4th one he hadn't offered yet. "I want to understand exactly what he's been doing," I said. "Before I do anything, I want to see the whole board." My father looked at me for a moment. Then he pushed the coffee pot toward me and said, "Then let's see the whole board." It took 6 weeks. My father's general counsel, a meticulous woman named Patricia— No, not Patricia, that name's on the list. A meticulous woman named Ruth pulled everything. Corporate filings, loan applications, the financial statements Nathan's firm had submitted when they pitched for a partnership with Ashby Capital 2 years prior. Ruth had a way of reading documents the way a surgeon reads an X-ray. Quickly, quietly, and with a precision that made everything obvious. What she found was not spectacular in its villainy. It was ordinary. It was the kind of greed that doesn't even bother to be creative. Nathan's firm, Hale & Morrow, had been quietly overleveraged for 18 months. They'd taken on a commercial real estate portfolio in the mid-Atlantic region that was performing about 30% below projections. To cover the gap, they'd restructured debt 3 times, each time pushing the problem further down the road. The most recent restructure had been financed through a short-term bridge loan. High interest, short window, the kind of thing you do when you're out of better options. The bridge loan matured in 8 months. The partnership with Ashby Capital, specifically the capital infusion that partnership would bring, was their exit plan, and I was the door they intended to walk through. I sat in Ruth's office and read through the summary she'd prepared and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not heartbreak. That had already happened in the hallway at the Whitmore. This was something else. This was clarity. "How bad is it if the partnership doesn't close?" I asked. Ruth looked up from her reading glasses. "They survive, but it's painful. 18 to 24 months of serious restructuring. Possible regulatory scrutiny depending on how the bridge loan is classified. And if there's additional downward pressure on their portfolio." She paused. "Define additional." "Hypothetically," I said. She studied me for a moment, then it becomes a different conversation. I nodded. I stood up, picked up my bag, and thanked her. On the way out, I stopped at the door. "Ruth, does anyone know you pulled these documents?" She smiled very slightly. "I pulled them 3 months ago for routine due diligence on the partnership proposal. No one will find it unusual." I had not asked her to pull them 3 months ago. My father's people are very good at their jobs. I kept seeing Nathan. I cooked dinners and attended his firm's events and listened to him talk about the future he was planning. Our future, he called it, though I had begun to hear the word differently. I watched him arrange things. Flowers for Simone, sent to a work address. Weekend calls that he took in the bathroom with the fan running. I also did not tell him that Ashby Capital had quietly begun declining to return his senior partner's calls. I did not tell him that 2 of his firm's anchor tenants in the Mid-Atlantic portfolio had received better offers from a competing property group. A group that happened to be managed by a subsidiary that happened to be 3 steps removed from a holding company that my father's trust had established in Delaware in 2019. I did not tell him any of this. I just watched. There is a particular loneliness to knowing something large that the person across the dinner table does not know. We would sit there, his nice apartment, his nice wine, his nice plans, and I would think about parallel tracks, about how 2 people can believe they are in the same conversation while actually occupying entirely different ones. One evening, he reached across the table and took my hand. "I want to close this partnership before we set the wedding date," he said. "I want everything settled. I want to give you a real life." I looked at him. His eyes were sincere. Nathan had a gift for sincerity. It was probably his most useful quality and his most dangerous one. "Take all the time you need," I said. The phone call from his senior partner came on a Tuesday. I know because Nathan left the room to take it and came back 12 minutes later, looking like someone had changed the air pressure in the building. He sat down. He didn't say anything for a moment. "Ashby Capital is deprioritizing our partnership track," he said finally. "Apparently there's been a strategic realignment." I kept my expression at careful neutral. "What does that mean practically?" "It means they're not moving forward." He set his phone face down on the table. "Which means we have a problem with the bridge loan timeline," I said. "I'm sorry. Is there anything I can do?" He looked at me, really looked at me, the way you look at something when you're trying to figure out how useful it might still be, and he said, "Can you talk to your father? See if he has any connections? Anyone who might be able to move something of this size?" There it was. The actual sentence. The one that had been underneath everything for 3 years, finally surfacing. I said, "I can ask him." I did not call my father that night. I already knew exactly what my father would say, what we had agreed he would say, when the time came. The engagement party had been held at the Whitmore. The unraveling began at the Ashby Capital Winter Gala, which is held every year at a historic ballroom in Georgetown, and which Nathan had been trying to get himself invited to since before he met me. He had finally received an invitation 6 weeks earlier. He'd been so pleased, almost boyishly pleased, the kind of genuine delight that reminded me of who I'd thought he was, and he hadn't asked how it had arrived. I arrived at the gala alone. I had told Nathan I wasn't feeling well. I had told him to go ahead, that I would try to meet him there. He had gone without much argument, which told me something. I wore a black dress, dark enough to move through the edges of a room without gathering attention. And my hair was different from how I usually wore it. Down instead of up. a small thing that changes more than you'd expect. I arrived 20 minutes after the event started, when the room was already full enough to enter, without being the first thing anyone saw. I found my father near the bar. He handed me a glass of sparkling water. "He's here," my father said quietly. "I know," I said. "Simone is also here." I hadn't known that part. I held the water glass with both hands and breathed for a moment. "Together?" I asked. "Separately. For now." I turned slowly and found Nathan on the far side of the room. He was talking to a group of men I recognized, senior partners from two of the city's larger private equity groups. He was doing what Nathan does well, which is charm a room, make everyone feel like they're in on something together. He hadn't seen me yet. My father touched my elbow. "The CFO of Meridian Group is going to introduce himself to you in about 5 minutes. He's been trying to schedule a conversation about the Coastal Development Fund for weeks." I nodded. "Also," my father said, and his voice shifted slightly, still quiet, but with something underneath it. "The Hale and Morrow partner who handles their investor relations just gave notice. Word is starting to move through the room." I looked at him. "Word moves quickly," he said, "when the right people mention the right things at the right events." I had not asked my father to do this. I want to be clear about that. I had not asked, but he had done it anyway, because my father has always understood that the best defense is not a defense at all. It is simply a better positioned offense. Across the room, I watched Nathan's face change. Not dramatically. Just a slight shift, a tightening around the jaw, a recalibration. He'd heard something. Someone had said something to him and he was processing it. He looked around the room, and he saw me, not as his fiancée, as someone he didn't fully recognize. I watched the confusion move across his face. The context was wrong. I was standing next to Walter Ashby, who was treating me not as a guest's girlfriend but as his equal, and Nathan didn't have the framework to make sense of what he was seeing. He started moving toward us. I could see him adjusting his approach in real time, smoothing his expression, preparing the right version of himself. My father said without looking at him, "Here he comes." I said. "Do you want me to stay?" "No," I said. "I've got this." Nathan reached us. He smiled. His good smile, the one that had worked on me for 3 years. "Sweetheart," he said. "I didn't know you were coming. You said you weren't feeling well." "I felt better," I said. He looked at my father. My father looked at him with an expression that could generously be called pleasant. "Mr. Ashby," Nathan said with just a trace of the performance. "The careful calibration of how much to defer without seeming like you're deferring. It's great to see you here. I've been hoping to connect with you about—" "Yes," my father said mildly. "I imagine you have." That there was a pause. Nathan's smile held, but something shifted behind his eyes. I said, "Nathan, I should tell you something." He turned to me. His expression was still composed, still doing the work of composed, but there were cracks at the edges now. "My name is not on the Ashby Capital org chart because my father didn't want our personal relationship to complicate business evaluations," I said. "What is on the org chart, and has been for 4 years, is my signature authority on all investment decisions above $20 million. Nathan went very still. "The strategic realignment you heard about this week," I continued, "was mine. The anchor tenants in your Mid-Atlantic portfolio received competing offers from a group I authorized in the fall, and the bridge loan review that's been circulating at your firm's creditor. That request originated from my desk." I watched him understand it. I watched the whole structure of the last 3 years rearrange itself in his head. Who he thought I was, who he thought my father was, what he thought this engagement had been. "Why?" said. It came out quieter than I think he intended. "I stood in a hallway at the Whitmore," I said, "and I heard you tell Simone that the deal with my father was the way out." He opened his mouth. "I'm not angry," I said, which was true. I had moved past angry sometime in the fall, somewhere between reviewing the loan documents and watching him lie to my face over dinner for the 14th time. "I want you to know that. I'm not doing this because I'm angry. I'm doing this because I needed to see the whole board before I made a move. And now I have." I handed him back the engagement ring. I had been carrying it in my clutch for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment, and this felt right. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just accurate. "The bridge loan has an 8-month window," I said. "If I were you, I would start making calls tonight." I turned. I found the CFO of Meridian Group across the room, and I walked toward him, and I did not look back. The aftermath was not a single moment. It was a season. Hale and Morrow did not collapse. I want to be accurate about that, because I am not interested in destruction for its own sake. What happened was more precise than collapse. The bridge loan was renegotiated, but on much harder terms, and the process was public enough that 3 of their institutional clients moved their business elsewhere. Nathan's senior partner retired early. Nathan himself was still at the firm a year later, but in a diminished role, managing smaller accounts, no longer the one being brought into the big rooms. Simone left the firm in March. I know this only because Ruth mentioned it in passing, the way she mentions most things, without editorializing, just as information. I signed a coastal development fund worth $470 million in February, the largest deal Ashby Capital had closed in 6 years. My name was on the press release. It was the first time my name had been publicly attached to the company in any significant way. My father sent me flowers, lilies, which I love, and which he always pretends to forget I love, and which he has sent me for every major accomplishment since I was 16 years old. I put them in the window of my office, in a building in DuPont Circle, that I had quietly purchased the prior year as a long-term asset play. I am not telling this story because I won. I am telling it because of the thing I learned in that hallway, and in the 6 weeks after it, and in all the dinners and phone calls and careful silences that followed. The thing I learned is this. The people who underestimate you are not doing you a favor by mistake. They are handing you a specific kind of advantage, and what you do with it is entirely up to you. Nathan handed me 3 years of him showing me exactly who he was, while believing I had no power to act on what I saw. He was wrong about the power, and I made sure, eventually, that he knew it.